All right, everyone, there's an 11th hour attempt as we speak right now to try to justify Joe Biden not going to the debates, and one of the ideas is that they're trying to get him to put a bunch of preconditions on it. It's funny because if you read all of their legacy media stories a month ago, they're like, well, Trump might not show up at the debates. He doesn't want to debate Biden because Biden is obviously such a great public speaker. He's afraid of Joe, and he's going to do everything that he can to avoid debating. And they tried to use the fact that Trump was talking about wanting a fair moderator as a reason, like that the idea of having an unbiased moderator is somehow an unreasonable precondition to holding a debate. I think it's pretty reasonable. That being said, now they're saying that Biden should refuse to go, basically unless Trump puts on a cuck belt first by having a live fact-checking, like at the debate, like a fact-checking panel. The problem with this is that if you look at fact-checking, it is intrinsically biased. You have sampling bias, number one, although with live fact-checking, that's a little bit more difficult to actually. You have an intrinsic political belief among anyone that's actually doing the fact-checking. And then you have the problem where something might be interpreted in different ways. And so on the objective face, it could be very much true, but it could technically be a lie or vice versa. It is possible to have those situations. When you're talking about anything other than diehard facts and figures, fact-checking becomes useless. If you're talking about like the number of jobs created or the unemployment rate or something, you can fact-check that. But if you're talking about some sensitive diplomatic stuff or something theoretical like, oh, my proposal will cost X amount of money according to our own internal studies, it's subjective anyway. It's not real math. It's not real statistics. Fact-checking it makes no sense. And other preconditions as well. Basically, it's like, well, I won't debate evil Orange Drumpfler unless Drumpf is the name on his podium, and like petulant stuff like that. And I predicted that this would happen. Joe Biden, to his credit himself, appears ready to participate in the debates. Apparently, though, his campaign wants to push the issue and attempt to get preconditions, and then what will happen is that Trump, of course, he's not going to agree to live fact-checking because it's pointless. It'll slow down the debate, it'll be biased, it'll be pointless. When he then refuses, Joe can then stall out and say, well, maybe I won't go. Trump is scared because he knows that he lies all the time, or some dumb shit like that. Of course, Trump will maneuver around it, and it's not going to impact his support with his core fans. You can expect this, though, to at least be a minor issue. It may not get taken up by the Biden camp itself. This is from the New York Times. The New York Times has severe Trump derangement syndrome and probably doesn't want the debates. Look, I guarantee these people are nervous as fuck about Biden getting up on a stage for an hour and a half with Donald Trump to begin with. Fact-checking or not, it really won't make any difference. By the way, if you expect a politician to tell the truth all the time and never tell a falsehood, you shouldn't bother voting at all, because trust me, there's no such thing. George Washington aside, supposedly, these people are almost trained. Half of these people are corporate lawyers. They have no choice. It's just the way that they've been raised. They've been corrupted by power. I mean, goodness. It'd be really funny if they have the independent fact-checking panel and then Trump very cautiously approaches everything so it looks like he's the truth teller and just fucks Joe Biden in the ass that way. But, I mean, it's probably not going to happen. There will probably be debates. The hope is that they're in person because there's a stage presence involved, especially at the town hall style. Usually the second debate's more of a town hall style. There's a stage presence, and it does matter. The optics matters for political reasons. You need to have a leader who has a presence. So you don't want someone like Emmanuel Macron. You don't want someone like Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau can pose for the cameras, but when he's in a group of people, he looks like a sad sack. He has trouble finding friends. You remember that time that I think it was Trudeau, or it might have been Macron. One of them was like trying to talk to the leader of Brazil, and the leader of Brazil basically leans in the other direction, starts talking to some dude from Japan, I think it was. And then he sort of like looks down at his plate all sad and dejected, like he had been diplomatically rejected in that moment. This sort of stuff does matter. You want your chief executive, this is why taller individuals tend to do better in elections. Stage presence matters. By the way, how tall is Joe Biden? I think he's about average height. I think he's about 5'11" or something. So Trump will have a few inches on him. That does play a role. It's not a big one. It plays a slight role. Wearing red, the fact that the GOP tends to wear red ties is technically a little bit of an advantage over the Dems that usually choose some combination of blue or purple. And then you have the yellow of the libertarians, not necessarily the most aesthetic color theme, but it just plays a role. Again, these are all things that are rooted in human biology. But I guarantee that the neoliberals sense danger. They know that despite the bravado, oh, Biden will beat him up, oh, Biden's such a great man, he's got such a great track record, they're terrified of two things. They're terrified of his record coming back to bite him in the ass with the left, because Trump can come out of nowhere and blindside this dude. Trump was not a tough-on-crimer. Trump can say, well, I passed the First Step Act, you were passing tough-on-crime legislation. And you should have known better. I never supported it at the time either. Technically speaking, for Trump, that's true. At the time, he was almost a reformist Democrat back in the 90s. When he joined the conservatives in the 2000s, it was almost a joke. It was really just for economic reasons. It's not a social conservative. Why do you think that Brett Kavanaugh, who supposedly was going to destroy Roe v. Wade single-handedly, his first major decision on the bench was to side with the liberal majority there and with Roberts in a 6-3 to not take cases on abortion that could have endangered its existence in certain states? Why the fuck do you think? Because he's not a far-righter. Kavanaugh, maybe on guns and on economics he's on the right, but otherwise he's just a center-of-the-road kind of guy. Represents sort of the 90s, 2000s neoliberal consensus, ironically. John Roberts as well. It's very interesting. Other than replacing Scalia with a hard right individual, Trump is not really doing that. It's just not his MO. And they're also terrified of the obvious, which is that Biden will stumble on stage. He will say something crazy. He'll lose track of what he's saying. He'll meander and blunder through his responses. The problem is that they saw the debates at the primaries. Go back and watch the Democratic primary debates. To my knowledge, they're all still on YouTube. I'd be surprised if they don't try to scrub them off the internet so people don't remember how derpy Joe Biden is in the near future. Go back and watch them. When Joe Biden is speaking, what happens? He gets muddled, he gets antagonistic, and he gets antagonized. That's Joe Biden debating in a nutshell. Trump is going to watch those debates. Trump's debate prep will just be to memorize 6 or 7 details about Joe Biden's own fucking record and a few numerics of his own accomplishments, 4 or 5 things, and then go and watch those debates several times. That's all he has to do for debate prep. Joe Biden is likely to implode on a live debate stage at least once. I give it a 10-20% chance that at least once at one of the debates he makes a super gaffe. Like something that's really goddamn out there, like people, like the curtain is pulled back and finally people see the demented man he really is. Or they see him, because of Tough on Crime, some of his comment eulogizing, it was a bird or one of these other Klansmen like Hillary's friend there. Stuff like that can come back and bite him in the ass. The problem is that the Democrats are relying upon, the only group in the Democratic Party with any enthusiasm are like the young far leftists. They're already pissed enough about the fact that Bernie's not the candidate. He has to choose his VP, his running mate, very, very carefully. If he stumbles with them, it's basically over. The enthusiasm gap won't be 16, it'll be like 20 or 25. It'll be at legendary levels. Trump will stomp him even if he's behind in the polls. I predict that Trump could be 4.5 points behind in final polling, and that a differential in polling, that is an inaccuracy, an aggregated inaccuracy, and differential turnout due to enthusiasm will make up that entire gap. I think there will be a 4.5 point swing in this election. It won't be just 2.5. It was 2.5 in the last election, which is already a considerable amount. Remember, Trump was 2.4 behind. He finishes slightly ahead in the national averages. And of course, in the end, he wins handily in the Electoral College. Clinton, so mad and so drunk that she couldn't even take the stage that night to give her concession. You know that was because she was completely out of it. She was incoherent with rage, and Huma had to hand her an extra Chardonnay, and she was she would have tottered out on stage and looked the drunk that she is. That's why Hillary Clinton didn't concede that night. It wasn't because they thought they could win. Remember when Podesta there had to come out on stage and say, well, it's not over yet, folks. Go home and get some sleep. And then they have to spit shine her the next day and drag her. She was definitely glowing the next day. Probably had a massive hangover, too. It would have been very, very funny to have seen her backstage. Somebody should have snuck in a little camera to watch her meltdown. Then the nation would really know what a bullet they dodged by voting for Trump. That's about all. Peace out.